One small-town librarian with an unforgettable mind, one billionaire on the brink, and a second chance neither of them saw coming. Hello, and welcome to a new chapter of the Worthington Chronicles. I'm your host, Amelia Worthington, and this is where we escape into stories of heart, hope, and healing, where even broken paths can lead to beautiful destinations. This channel is for the people, created for challenging times, a reminder that love and faith still have power. And as a thank you for being part of this journey, we're doing a grocery giveaway once we reach 1,000 subscribers, views, and comments. To enter, just subscribe, watch until the end, and leave a comment below. One subscriber will be chosen at random and personally contacted when we reach our goal. Now, let's take a deep breath, quiet the world, and begin our next story of romance and redemption. The Cedar Brook Library sounded like comfort. Pages, breathing, a clock's easy tick, sunlight settling into warm squares on old oak tables. 19-year-old Amira Weeks slid a novel into its place and let the hush settle over her like a friendly quilt. When the world outside felt too loud, this was her steady shore. Amira remembered everything, not just facts, but the way cinnamon smelled on a December morning 8 years ago, the way a teacher's smile strained at the edges on a spring day when money was tight at home, the exact lilt in the voice of the girl who once said we should hang out and never meant it. Her memory was a room with the lights always on. Today, in the quiet, that room felt almost gentle. The bell over the door chimed. A man stepped in, tall, precise, the kind of composed you learned from long rooms and harder choices. Charcoal. Suit, scuffed left heel, a faint current of bergamot and rain clinging to his coat. His gaze swept the rotunda, taking in the history mural, the glass cases, the sleepy glow of late afternoon. "I'm looking for Amira Weeks," he said at the eye. Desk. The voice was calm and low, trained to steady a room. Amira finished shelving the last book and turned, the practiced neutrality in her posture, something she wore like a cardigan. "You found her." He set a card on the counter. "Gregory Manning." Then, with less polish and more honesty, "Greg." People often led with importance. He didn't. That, more than the suit, told her he belonged to big decisions. "How can I help you?" she asked. He glanced at the reading room, softened his tone out of respect for the quiet. "I need a researcher, someone who notices what others overlook." Amira's mouth tipped at one corner. "We do have databases for that." He almost smiled. "I mean a person, you." He paused, aware that he was stepping onto delicate ground. "My mother grew up here. She told me stories about a little girl who could read a page once and repeat it a week later, backward if you asked. I didn't come because of a story. I came because my company shows perfect numbers and a very real sinkhole underneath. Thousands of small anomalies, clean audits, unhappy math." "You suspect theft," she said quietly. "I suspect we'll lose good people if I don't fix it." His gaze didn't challenge. It asked, "I can hire 10 auditors and get 10 reports. I need one truth." The library seemed to listen. Dust glittered in a beam of light. Somewhere in children's, page turned. Amira could have said no. She had said no to a dozen smaller asks in her short life. School committees, front-of-class presentations, anything that made her memory into a spectacle. But Greg hadn't come to prod a circus trick. He had come like a person whose pockets were full of cares he didn't want to drop on anyone else. "What would you ask me to do?" she said. "Observe," he answered simply. "Quietly, discreetly, as an intern rotating through departments. You won't be asked to pretend, to be someone you're not. You'll have your own apartment, a stipend. And I'll make a personal gift to the Cedar Brook Library Endowment, enough to secure its hours and staff for the next 10 years. He didn't look at the building with pity. He looked at it with appreciation. "Places like this made me. I want to keep this one standing." "And my family?" Amira asked, because the practical truth belonged in any conversation with hope. "My grandfather carries the last of my grandmother's medical debt. It weighs." Greg nodded, as if he'd already thought of that, and perhaps he had. "I'll erase it. Cleanly. Quietly. No publicity. He won't owe anyone for kindness." was a generous offer. It was also a doorway. Amira felt the tug, the first flicker of curiosity she'd allowed herself about what her mind could do if it wasn't hiding. She imagined walking through glass-bright halls and listening for patterns. She imagined lifting weight off her grandfather's shoulders and turning on a light in this beloved building that would not go out again. Her answer came like a breath she'd been holding. Yes. Greg didn't crow. He only nodded, as if she'd confirmed what he hoped the world could still be, that people still said yes for reasons that mattered. Thank you, Amira. Boundary, she said, surprising them both. If I do this, I don't become rumor. No one gets to make me a party story. I'm a person, not a parlor trick. Agreed, he said immediately. I put people between myself and problems for years. It didn't make the problems smaller. It made the people smaller. I won't do that to you. He left her with a folder, practical details, a start date, a phone number that rang through to him, not a gatekeeper, and he left the library the way he had arrived, respectful, steady, aware that quiet was holy. Amira stood alone a moment. Longer. She touched the counter, the wood she'd polished 100 afternoons. She looked up at the stained glass skylight and thought of all the stories it had watched. Students, proposals, triumphs, grief. A place doesn't ask you to be less. It teaches you that more is possible. She breathed in the scent of ink and glue and time and whispered a promise to the room that had raised her. I will bring this safety back to you. Her grandfather, Arthur Weeks, was stirring a pot on the stove when she got home. It's stew, he said like a secret. I put in the time too early, but don't tell the time. She smiled, kissed his cheek, and sat at the table. The kitchen smelled of onions and love. Gramps, I got an opportunity. He listened without interrupting, except to push the air salt toward her and to nudge the roll basket closer in that wordless way he had of saying, let the good things be easy. When she told him the part about the debt, his eyes shone, and he looked down and cleared his throat. When she told him about the library endowment, he closed his eyes for a moment like a man hearing a prayer answered. And what about you? He asked finally, his voice worn with care and bright with pride. Not your mind. You. Amira considered the question. I think I'm tired of getting small to stay safe. He reached across the table. His hand was work-strong and warm. Then go be the size you are. But remember, home is not the place that hides you. It's the place that holds you while you grow. He squeezed once. And call me every night, because I like to know what the city smells like. It smells like rain on stone, she said, already smiling at tomorrow. On Monday, a black sedan carried her from Cedar Brook to Glass and Steel. The city rose like a tide, brick to steel, steeples to cranes, maples to lights. Amira watched, her reflection in the window as streets multiplied and the sky narrowed to sky between. Manning and Vale headquarters caught the clouds in its face and handed them back as 100 shifting mirrors. The lobby was bright and quiet, soft-shoed, a hum of concentrated attention. No one shouted. Even the elevators spoke politely. An HR badge photo captured her without the usual flinch. The apartment key turned without sticking. The welcome binder listed grocery stores, parks, a library branch 3 blocks over. The refrigerator contained water and, inexplicably, a jar of apricot jam. Her first rotation placed her at a shared desk in finance ops. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. People worked with a forward lean that said the day had plans and they planned to meet them halfway. A woman with a sunny scarf slid a small plant onto Amira's desk. I'm Priya, she said. Everyone who sits here gets Fern. She's unkillable and she likes company. Hi, Fern, Amira said, and Priya laughed in the way of people who collect friends without trying. Greg passed by later with 2 team leads, paused when he saw the plant, and the line of his mouth softened. Fern is the true CEO, he said, and moved on. It wasn't a joke so much as proof he knew which small things kept big ones human, Amira observed. That was the work. She didn't poke. She didn't pry. She listened the way you listen for an orchestra's tuning. Small dissonances that become a song if you wait. When someone said just a hair over budget, about a line item that was exactly a hair over budget every Friday at 4:52 p.m. She wrote it down. When a vendor invoice always contained a transposed digit on Tuesdays, she wrote that down too. When two colleagues who never ate together started splitting a sandwich in the window alcove twice a week, the same days a certain system pinged after hours, she noticed that not because it was wrong, but because it was a rhythm, and rhythms mattered. She made tea in the break room because coffee jittered her memory into a strobe. She memorized names and how people liked their weather, umbrella and sun just in case, coat open even in rain, scarf year-round because air vents were traitors. She discovered the building had a sweet spot on the 17th floor where the afternoon light slid across a white wall like a sheet and made you feel taller. On day 3, she sat quietly at a marketing review, hands folded, attention steady. A senior VP with an easy laugh presented a campaign with slides that clicked in clean succession. On one slide, a bar chart graced the screen for less than 2 seconds, 4.5mm allocation. On the very next breath, he said 4.7. It was small. People get nervous, numbers are round, meetings move. She didn't stand up. She didn't correct him. She wrote it down. On the way out, she asked the junior analyst who carried the printouts how her weekend had been, and the answer included a detail about a dog named Tuesday and a vet bill, which wasn't relevant, and also told her that people will tell you the truth if you don't make them feel like you already know it. That night, Amira walked to the little library branch 3 blocks from her apartment and got a card. The librarian's cardigan had embroidered lemons on it. When Amira asked what he loved best on the new shelf, he handled 3 spines like gifts and pushed all 3 across the counter, because choosing is not always the point. On the 4th morning, Greg texted a meeting time with a location she didn't recognize. 12 minutes later, she stood in the building's top floor lounge, which looked like a quiet hotel for thoughts. Soft chairs, soft lamps, a city unfurling in every direction. He was already there, jacket off, sleeves folded in a way that said he'd learned from a tailor and unlearned from long nights. "Walk me through your week," he said, as if asking for a story. She did. Not a list. A map. She described the Tuesday-Thursday after-hours pings on a secondary server that were always followed by tiny reconciliations, the vendor with the transposed digit that no one corrected because it always arrived just before closing, the 4.5 that became 4.7 in the span of a breath. Greg listened without interrupting, which turned out to be one of his rarer talents. When she finished, he didn't jump to solution. "What do you need?" he asked instead. "Time," she said. "A quiet laptop not connected to the main grid, read-only access to change logs, someone who can get me the coffee shop receipts for the ground floor for the last 8 months. She waited for him to ask why. He didn't. He only nodded. "And one more thing," she added. And the ask felt odd and important. "Boundaries for me. If anyone questions why I'm here, I'm your intern. If anyone requires more, I'm your researcher. I don't explain my mind." "You don't have to," he said. "It's yours." She studied him a second, then offered a small truth in return. "I don't hate my memory. I hate when it's used like a trick. It's just how I notice. It's how I love things." He took that in like information to be protected, not used. "Then we'll treat it like that." Over the next week, the patterns sharpened. The after-hours pings lined up with building badge entries that used a generic maintenance credential, which was supposed to be retired. The vendor with the transposed digit delivered muffins on Fridays to one particular floor and never billed for them, which was either generosity or camouflage. The 4.5-4.7 VP laughed harder than a joke required whenever the CEO entered a room, which means little, and also sometimes means everything when placed beside a spreadsheet no one else remembers. Each night, Amira called her grandfather and told him 2 things that were good. One night it was that the city smelled like pretzels and wet concrete and her shoes didn't squeak anymore. Another night it was that there was a maple in a pocket park that had decided to turn early, gold among glass. He told her in return that he'd found her grandmother's recipe card for blueberry buckle and had decided the oven was not the enemy after all. On Friday afternoon, Greg stopped by her shared desk and looked at Fern. "Still thriving," he said, and then to Amira, "You?" She hesitated, then gave him the simple truth. I'm beginning to feel useful in a way that doesn't make me small. Good, he said, the word quiet and full. That's the job description the world forgets. That evening, when most of the building emptied and the city turned its lights on, Amira followed a hunch. The generic maintenance badge pinged again at 7:06 p.m. She stood at the end of a hallway near a service door and listened. Somewhere behind the walls, a machine clicked twice, a pause, then once more, the same rhythm she'd heard on Tuesday. She wrote it down. In the quiet, a scent drifted past, solder, faint, and out of place in a carpeted corridor. She wrote that down too. On the way back to her apartment, she stopped at a bakery where the lemon bars tasted like a summer you almost remember. She bought two, meaning one for now and one for later, and on the sidewalk outside she watched a father crouch to tie a child's shoe with the reverence of a man handling a small, shining thing. She stored that not because it was useful to a case, but because usefulness is not the only measure that matters. Her phone buzzed. A message from Greg. Thank you for the week you just gave my people. I know you're doing this for your library and your family. I need you to know you're also doing it for me. Not the CEO. Me. She stood under a streetlight that made the raindrops look like soft sparks and typed back, You're welcome. I'm doing it for me, too. Amira fell asleep with the window cracked and dreamed, for once, not of loops she couldn't stop, but of a path that kept opening. On Monday, a small mailbox key arrived on her desk in an interoffice envelope with no note. It fit a narrow slot in a hallway she had not noticed before. Inside was a plain paperback notebook and a single line in neat block letters. What you see changes what we are. Please keep seeing. She smiled, tucked the notebook into her bag, and turned back to the living puzzle with a steadier heart. Somewhere between the tea she poured at 10 and the server log she examined at noon, the story of a girl who hid her. Light began, quietly, gently, to become the story of a woman who used it. And for the first time since she could remember, Amira wasn't afraid of remembering this part. She wanted to. Monday arrived with a clean, rain-washed sky. Seattle was all glass and glimmer that morning, buildings sparkling as if the city itself had decided to start over. Amira liked that. Cities, like people, had to decide to begin again, every single day. She stopped at the cafe across from headquarters where the barista had already learned her order. Chamomile tea with honey, no lemon. She didn't need to give her name anymore. He just nodded and smiled like someone who understood routine was another kind of prayer. By the time she reached her desk, she felt calm. Ready. What she didn't expect was a quiet ripple moving through the office. The hum of rumor carried in the subtle choreography of glances. Someone had been escorted out of the building late Friday. No one said who. Everyone said nothing. When Greg walked past her station that morning, his composure was tighter than usual. Controlled, but thoughtful. Their eyes met for just a second. It was enough to tell her he knew she knew. He didn't speak until that afternoon, conference room 12, his text read, Bring your notes, Anne Fern. She almost laughed at that last word, because of course he remembered the plant. The conference room had a wall of glass that caught the sunlight and scattered it in bright gold strips across the table. Greg stood by the window, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked more like a man than an empire. Sit, he said softly. She did. Fern sat too, on the edge of the polished table like a silent witness. Friday night confirmed what you noticed, he said, hands braced, on the back of a chair. The discrepancies, the secret transfers. You were right. There was no pride in his voice, only a quiet gravity. It was a senior manager, he continued. Not one I expected. He confessed to a side deal that's been growing for nearly a year. The losses were small enough to stay hidden, but constant enough to bleed the company. Amira listened, not speaking. Greg exhaled, rubbed the bridge of his nose. You saved us more than money, Amira. You saved time. I can replace revenue. I can't replace time. Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. I didn't save anyone, she murmured. I just noticed. He looked up at her then, You saw what no one else could see. Don't diminish that. For a moment, the room fell into a soft quiet, the kind that isn't awkward but alive with meaning. Come on, he said, straightening. Let's get out of this glass box. There's a cafe 2 blocks away with sunlight that tastes like mercy. They walked side by side down the avenue, the air smelling faintly of wet concrete and roasted beans. Greg held the door open for her. Inside, the cafe was small and unassuming. Brick walls, soft jazz, and window seats lined with ferns that looked suspiciously like Fern's cousins. They ordered, and while waiting, Amira noticed something about him she hadn't before. When he smiled, really smiled, it didn't start with his mouth. It began with his eyes. There was weariness there, yes, but also the unmistakable flicker of hope. How long have you been carrying this company? She asked, stirring her tea. He hesitated. My father started it. I expanded it. Somewhere along the way, I stopped remembering why. She tilted her head. Why did you start? He looked at the window, at the streak of light sliding down the glass. Because I wanted to build something that would last. Something solid. Something people could depend on. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could hold everything together. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I'm realizing that holding everything together doesn't always mean holding it alone. Amira's lips parted slightly, then closed. Again. There were things one could say to that, but some truths didn't need sound to echo. When they left the cafe, the afternoon sun caught in his hair and turned it gold for a second. She found herself memorizing it, the way her mind always did. But for the first time, the memory didn't feel heavy. It felt like light she wanted to keep. The following weeks unfolded with purpose. Amira worked longer hours, but not the brittle kind. She and Greg began reviewing data side by side, piecing together a full picture of the internal thefts. They spoke less in numbers now, and more in patterns, human ones, motives, pressures, small compromises that became large consequences. Sometimes they'd argue. She'd challenge his assumptions, he'd counter with pragmatism. But even in disagreement, there was an unspoken respect. Do you always push this hard? He asked one evening as the sky turned violet behind him. Only when someone mistakes. Silence for agreement, she replied. He smiled. Noted. Her grandfather called nightly. His voice, warm and grounded, tethered her to home. The garden's showing off again, he said one night. The roses have decided the world's worth blooming for. Then maybe I will too, she said softly. He chuckled. That's my girl. When they hung up, she sat by the window looking at the city lights. She was changing. She could feel it. The memory she'd once hated was becoming a bridge instead of a cage. She was using it to help, to build, to redeem. And somehow, in helping Greg find truth, she was finding her own. 3 weeks later, she caught something no algorithm could. The transfers didn't just happen at random, they danced to a rhythm. Every 8 days, always between 7 and 7:15. But the destination accounts changed with eerie precision, cycling through shell companies that eventually looped back to one entity, Nexus Consulting. And there it was again, the name from that bar chart. Her breath caught. Greg was across the room in a meeting, but when he emerged, one look at her expression made him stop. What is it? She showed him. The pattern, the loops, the signature. For a moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, That's Logan. Amira frowned. Logan? My best friend, he said, voice barely above a whisper. We started the company together. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of a heart breaking quietly enough that only those who cared could hear it. That night, Greg didn't go home. Neither did she. They stayed in the office, poring over logs and audit trails until the city outside dimmed to a hum. Maybe there's another explanation, she said finally, trying to offer the grace she saw in him. He shook his head. He had access. He had motive. And now he has guilt written all over the data. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and for the first time she saw something raw flicker through him. Betrayal, grief, exhaustion. You trusted him, she said. Gently, I still do, he whispered. That's the problem. She reached out before she could think twice, resting her hand lightly over his. Then let's find out the truth together. No assumptions, no anger. Just truth. He looked at her hand, then up at her, eyes darker, but grateful. Together. They set the trap 2 days later. A false account, carefully crafted, humming quietly in the system like an invitation. At 7:08 p.m., it happened. The same phantom signature, the same precision, the same betrayal. Security moved quickly. When Greg returned from the confrontation, his face was pale. The man who had walked into the library weeks ago, controlled, confident, was gone. In his place stood someone human, humbled by loss. It's over, he said. He admitted everything. He said he thought I'd never notice. You did? She said softly. No, he corrected, looking directly at her. You did. The following days were quiet. Greg handled the fallout with a grace that came not from corporate training, but from character. He ensured Logan's severance was fair, that his staff knew the truth, but not the humiliation. He didn't let revenge guide him, only resolution. Amira saw that, and something deep within her softened. Redemption didn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the choice to forgive where it would be easier to forget. When Greg finally came to see her, he looked tired but lighter. Do you know what I realized? He asked. You're the only person I've met who sees everything, and still chooses to see the good. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the trick to surviving memory. You learn to love what's worth keeping. That weekend, he invited her to lunch, not at a restaurant, but at a park by the water. The air was cool and tasted faintly of salt. Children chased kites. A musician played a soft tune on a steel guitar. I thought you might miss quiet, he said. So I brought you the city's version of it. She laughed, genuine and light. They sat on a bench with takeout containers and watched the light dance on the waves. He turned to her after a while. You once said your memory was a prison. It was, she said. And now? She thought. About it. The gulls circling overhead. The smell of coffee and sea air mixing around them. Now it's a library. Some books hurt to open, but they all mean something. Greg's expression softened. Then maybe I can be part of a chapter you'll want to remember. She looked at him then. The man who had started as a storm and become a steady light, and said quietly, You already are. Weeks passed. Seasons hinted at change. The company stabilized. The library's donation cleared. Her grandfather's debts disappeared into history. And Amira began to bloom. Her coworkers stopped calling her the quiet intern and started calling her the one who fixes things. She smiled more. She said yes to after-work tea. She let herself exist in the world's bright spaces instead of hiding in its creases, Greg noticed. Of course he did. One evening, as the office emptied, he stood in the doorway of her workspace, watching her close her notebook. You know, he said, you could stay. She looked up. You mean, as an employee? As whatever you want to be, he said. You've built something here that's bigger than either of us. Amira hesitated. I promised my grandfather I'd come home. Greg nodded slowly. Then go home. But don't think of it as leaving. Think of it as carrying us with you. Her eyes shone, though she blinked quickly to hide it. You're very good at goodbyes. I'm trying to be better at beginnings, he said. The day she left, the city rained softly, as if blessing the parting. Greg walked her to the car himself. No entourage, no ceremony. Just two people who had changed each other in ways neither could have predicted. Thank you, he said quietly. For saving my company, yes, but more for reminding me what purpose feels like. Thank you, she replied, for seeing me when I didn't want to be seen. He hesitated, then reached out, brushing a raindrop from her hair. You'll remember this moment forever, won't you? Yes, she whispered. Good, he said softly. Then make it one worth keeping. Cedar Brook looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Her grandfather was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of cocoa. "How's the city?" he asked. "Loud," she said, smiling. "But kinder than I thought." "And the man?" She looked away, then back. "Still learning how to forgive." Arthur chuckled. "Aren't we all?" Inside, the radio played an old tune. The air smelled like stew and home. Later, as she walked through the library after hours, she paused by the front window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, and the lamplight made the dust look like gold. She thought of Greg, of the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, of how, for once, her perfect memory didn't ache. It felt like grace. A week later, a package arrived at the library. Inside was a single book bound in dark blue leather, no title on the spine. Just an envelope tucked inside the first page, in Zhao. Greg's careful handwriting, it read, "Every mind that remembers too much deserves a place to rest. This book is blank, so you can fill it only with what you choose to keep." GM. Amira smiled. She opened to the first page and wrote one sentence. "Some memories are worth remembering twice. If the unforgettable mind touched your heart." Tonight, don't forget to like this story and subscribe to the Worthington Chronicles, where every tale reminds us that love redeems, courage restores, and even the sharpest memories can become soft with hope. He had lost everything money could buy, but for the first time in his life, he wanted what couldn't be purchased: peace, forgiveness, a way back to faith. Greg Manning hadn't prayed in years. Not since the night he buried his father beneath a sky that had refused to rain. He'd told himself faith was for those who needed comfort, not clarity. But lately, every deal, every success, every sleepless night had begun to feel hollow, like applause in an empty auditorium. Now driving through the green, winding roads that led into Cedar Brook, he realized how quiet the world could sound when you stopped trying to drown it out. The town looked like a photograph untouched by time. Maple, trees rustling, the smell of rain-soaked earth, children's laughter echoing somewhere beyond sight. And in the center of it all stood the small white building he'd come to find, the Cedar Brook Library. He parked in front and sat for a long moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his pulse loud in the stillness. He wasn't sure what he would say to her. He only knew that not saying it would haunt him more than any loss ever had. Amira stood by the front desk, scanning in returns. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling against her cheek. She hadn't seen Greg since that rainy morning. He'd walked her to the car the day she thought their chapter had closed for good. When the door opened, the familiar bell jingled. She looked up, and for a second, the world stopped. He stood there in the doorway, the afternoon light spilling in behind him like a benediction. His suit was gone, replaced by a dark sweater and the weariness of someone who had traveled far, not in miles, but in spirit. "Hi," he said softly. "I hope you still let in overdue patrons." Her breath caught. "Greg?" He smiled, small and uncertain. "You remembered my name?" As if I could forget. They stood there for a long, suspended moment, the quiet hum of the library wrapping around them like an old hymn. Finally, she found her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said. "Not about the company, not about numbers, about everything else." Amira gestured toward the reading area. "We should sit." They moved to the far corner by the big window overlooking the garden. The same table where she'd once hidden from the world now felt like holy ground. For a while, neither spoke. The rain began again, soft and steady, tapping against the glass like whispered confession. "I thought I was coming here to thank you," Greg said finally, his voice low. "But that's not true. I came because I've been running on empty, and I think you already found what I've been missing." Amira folded her hands on the table. "What's that?" "Faith." Her eyes lifted to his, wary but kind. He continued. "When you left, I kept hearing what you said that last day. That some memories are worth keeping. And I realized I don't have many that deserve remembering. Everything I built, it had no foundation, just pride and pressure. He exhaled shakily. The night after you left, I went home and opened the Bible my mother gave me. It still had her handwriting inside. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Amira's breath caught at the familiar verse. Greg looked up, eyes wet but steady. I sat there for hours. For the first time, I didn't try to fix or earn or strategize. I just sat, and I talked to him, out loud, like an idiot at first. But it didn't feel stupid after a while. It felt like coming home. Her throat tightened. You prayed. I did. For the first time in years. Amira blinked back tears she didn't expect. What did you say? He smiled faintly. I told him I didn't know what I was doing, but I was tired of pretending I did. And I asked him to forgive me for forgetting where everything came from in the first place. She nodded slowly, her heart aching with recognition. I know that feeling. Greg leaned forward. Do you? Amira looked out the window, the rain blurring the garden beyond. After I left Seattle, I kept thinking about everything I'd done. How many times I'd used my mind to survive instead of trust. I've spent my whole life remembering details, every mistake, every unkind word, every failure. But I forgot. Something that mattered more. He waited. She met his gaze again. I forgot that God doesn't remember like we do. We hold on to every scar. He forgives and lets go. Greg's breath hitched. That's beautiful. It's true, she said softly. My grandmother used to tell me that grace isn't about forgetting. It's about being remembered by love. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was enough just to feel the truth settle between them. Later that evening, as the rain thinned into mist, they walked together to the little church on Maple Street. The doors were open, a faint glow spilling into the twilight. Inside, candles flickered along the altar. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old hymns. Greg hesitated. I haven't been inside a church since my father's funeral. Amira smiled, gently. Then maybe tonight's the right time to start again. They slipped into a back pew. The wooden bench creaked under their weight. A small choir was rehearsing softly near the front, voices weaving through the air like threads of light. Do you think he listens? Greg asked quietly. Amira's eyes softened. Always. Even when we don't have the right words. Greg bowed his head and she followed suit. His prayer was unpolished, raw. God, I don't know what to say. I'm not here for a deal. I don't want to be alone anymore. Not without you. Amira's own prayer followed, whispered through tears. Lord, thank you for finding me even when I hid from you. Help me trust what I can't control, and forgive what I can't forget. That music swelled softly around them, the choir's harmony rapping like a promise. When they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cool, washed clean. Greg turned to her, his expression unguarded. You know, I came here to find peace, but maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you let back in. Amira smiled through the shimmer of lamplight. Maybe it's both. They walked in silence for a while, past the rows of old houses and the faint sound of crickets waking after the rain. I think I'd like to start over, Greg said finally. With what? With everything. 2 weeks later, Greg returned to Cedar Brook again, this time with a small team and a new proposal. He was reopening an old manufacturing plant just outside town, hiring local workers, donating part of the profits to fund scholarships and the library's youth programs. He called it the Restoration Project. The mayor gave a speech. Reporters came. But through it all, Greg kept glancing toward the library steps, where Amira stood beside her grandfather. When the crowd thinned, he walked over. Arthur Weeks shook his hand firmly. Good to see a man who doesn't just build companies, but communities, Greg smiled. I had good teachers. Arthur chuckled. You mean my granddaughter? Among others, Greg said, his gaze lingering on her. Amira blushed. "You've been busy. I've had help," he said simply. "God's been rebranding my life." She laughed, the sound bright and real. "You really are a businessman," he grinned. "Only when it comes to spreadsheets, not hearts." Her expression softened. "I think he's been working on both of ours." That Sunday, Greg joined Amira and her grandfather at church. The pastor, an older woman with a gentle strength, spoke on renewal. "Sometimes," she said, "God doesn't erase the past. He redeems it. He takes the parts we thought were wasted and turns them into testimony." Greg's hand brushed Amira's where it rested on the pew. She didn't pull away. When the congregation began to sing Amazing Grace, he tried to follow, stumbling over the words at first. Amira's voice was soft beside him, steady and sure. He found himself joining in. And somewhere in the middle of the verse, "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The meaning finally landed. He wasn't singing about someone else's miracle. He was living his own. After the service, they lingered, outside under the oak trees that lined the walkway. "You know," Amira said, "I think my grandmother was right. Every story worth remembering ends in grace." Greg smiled, tucking his hands into his pockets. "Then what's our story?" "Still being written." He nodded. "Good. Then I'll keep showing up to help write the next chapter." She tilted her head. "With coffee and spreadsheets?" He chuckled. "With faith and second chances." That evening, they sat on the library steps as the sun set over Cedar Brook. The sky burned gold and lavender, the air alive with the smell of cut grass and the hum of summer. Amira rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" He smiled. "Every day. But I think it's less about how far we've gone, and more about who brought us here." "God," she said softly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Him." They fell quiet, watching the light fade into dusk. Weeks turned into months. The library flourished, the town revived, and the once-forgotten factory now buzzed with life. Greg stayed in Cedar Brook more often than the city. He still led his company, but with different priorities and a new compass that pointed higher than profit. Amira continued her work at the library, mentoring local students, sharing her love of stories, and the lesson that every memory, even the painful ones, could be redeemed. On a quiet autumn morning, she found a note on her desk, his handwriting again. "Meet me at the church at sunset. G." The sanctuary was empty except for the glow of candles. Greg stood near the altar, nervous but smiling. "Do you remember," he said, "what you told me the first time we prayed together? That God remembers us by love?" She nodded, tears already glimmering. "I think that's what he's been doing," he said. "Remembering us, so we could remember him." He took her hand. "Amira Weeks, you helped me find my way back to faith, to forgiveness, and to hope. I don't know where life will lead us, but I know who's leading it, and I want to walk that path with you." She laughed through tears. "Greg Manning, are you proposing in a church?" He grinned. It seemed like the right place to talk. To God and you at the same time. Her heart was full to overflowing. Then yes. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, their joined hands trembling in the candlelight. They bowed their heads together, not just in love, but in prayer. "Thank you, Lord," Amira whispered, her voice breaking, "for reminding us that nothing is ever truly forgotten when you're the one writing the story." Outside, the church bells rang through the cool evening air, and the light spilling from the stained glass painted them both in color. Their story, once shadowed by memory and loss, had become a testimony of grace, and as the Worthington Chronicles' voice would tell it, in the end, it wasn't her perfect memory or his wealth that changed their lives. It was faith, the quiet kind that begins in broken places and ends in light. Because love may start in silence, but redemption always speaks. If the unforgettable mind moved your heart tonight, remember, Every story in the Worthington Chronicles is a journey of hope, forgiveness, and the love that finds us when we stop running. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories where faith restores what life breaks, please like, subscribe, and share. And as always, from me to you, may your heart remember the light, and may grace always find its way home. The church was alive with the scent of peonies and cedar wood polish, sunlight pouring through stained glass and ribbons of gold and rose. It was the same church where Greg and Amira had first prayed together, the same pews, the same soft hum of the organ warming up in the background. But today the air felt different. Holy, expectant. Amira stood near the open window of the small side room, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the delicate silver bracelet her grandmother had left her. Outside, she could hear laughter, the warm, gentle kind that comes when love fills a space so fully, there's nowhere left for fear to hide. She caught her reflection in the mirror. The dress was simple, ivory with lace at the sleeves, not extravagant, just right. Her hair was swept back loosely, a few curls framing her face, and in her bouquet were lilies, white roses, and sprigs of cedar, because she said she wanted to carry home with her wherever she went. Arthur knocked softly on the door. "You ready, sweetheart?" Amira turned and smiled. "I think so." He looked at her for a long moment, pride and tenderness in every line of his face. "Your grandmother would be crying her eyes out right now," Amira laughed softly. "I think she already is. From the good seats." Arthur chuckled, then offered his arm. "Then let's go make a memory worth keeping." The church filled quietly as the music began. Friends from Cedar Brook, co-workers from Seattle, faces both new and familiar turned toward the aisle as Amira appeared, sunlight glinting off her veil. Greg's breath caught when he saw her. He'd spent months imagining this moment, but nothing had prepared him for the way she looked walking toward him. There was no hesitation in her step, only grace, only peace. When she reached him, he took her hand and whispered, "You're every answered prayer I didn't know I had. And you," she whispered back, "are proof that God doesn't forget anyone." The pastor smiled. "We gather here today not just to witness a marriage, but to celebrate redemption. These two stand before us as living proof that God can rebuild what the world breaks, and that no story is too complicated for grace." Amira's eyes glistened. Greg's hand tightened around hers. The ceremony was short, but every word felt like a heartbeat. When it came time for vows, Amira spoke first. "Greg," she said, her voice steady but full, "I once believed my memory was my curse, that remembering everything meant I could never truly move forward. But you showed me that memory can be a form of worship, that every good thing, every grace we notice is proof that God is still near. You are my favorite memory and my greatest mercy." Greg swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Amira, I spent half my life chasing success and the other half running from regret. But when I met you, I learned that faith doesn't erase our past. It redeems it. You turned my striving into peace, my fear into trust, and my life into something I want to remember forever." The pastor smiled, his own voice catching. "May the God who began this story bring it to completion in joy. By the authority of heaven, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Greg leaned in, and their kiss was not a grand gesture. It was quiet, reverent, filled with the holiness of two hearts finally at rest. Applause rose, bright and joyful, echoing beneath the arched ceiling. Arthur clapped the loudest. Rosemary, their old friend from Seattle, wiped a tear and muttered to herself, "Finally." The reception was held at the library courtyard, transformed with twinkling lights and white tablecloths. Children ran between tables. Soft music drifted in the summer air. Greg made a toast, holding his glass high. "To Grace for remembering us when we forgot ourselves." The crowd cheered. Later, as the evening light melted into gold, he and Amira slipped away from the laughter, walking hand in hand to the garden gate where she used to sit and read as a girl. "This was your world once," Greg said softly. "Quiet. Safe. It still is, she replied. Only now it's bigger. There's room for both of us. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And for him. She nodded. Always. That night, as the last guests drifted home, Amira and Greg stood in the empty library, the candles flickering low. I used to think this building was the safest place in the world, she whispered. And now? She looked at him, eyes full of peace. Now I know safety isn't a place. It's a person. Greg smiled faintly. God? She nodded. And the people he brings when you stop trying to remember everything on your own. He wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time, her mind was completely still. Epilogue. 10 years later. The Cedarbrook Library was thriving. The town had grown. A new bakery, a flower shop, a small performing arts center funded by the Restoration Foundation. Children spilled out of the library doors every afternoon, clutching books like treasures. Inside, the air was still full of sunlight and the smell of paper, but now laughter mingled with it. At the front desk sat Amira, still the librarian, though now also a mother of two. Her hair was shorter, her smile softer. On her finger, the same simple gold band. She was helping a young girl find a book when Greg entered, their son on his shoulders, giggling as he tried to reach the ceiling fan. Mom says no running in the library, the boy announced. Greg grinned. I'm not running, I'm gliding efficiently. Amira laughed. You sound like your father, the boy puffed up proudly. That's because he's a businessman. Greg leaned down and kissed Amira's temple. Correction, reformed businessman. She looked up, eyes shining. Still rebranding? Every day, he said. God's got a long-term marketing plan. That evening, after closing time, the family walked to the church for Sunday rehearsal. Amira was helping direct the children's choir. Greg played the guitar, still learning, still slightly off-key. The children sang softly. "'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." Amira's gaze drifted to the stained glass window, the same one from their wedding. The light pouring through it painted her family in color. Her perfect memory captured it all. The melody, the smell of wax and cedar, the sound of her daughters. Laughter echoing in the pews. But this time it didn't hurt to remember, because this wasn't a record of pain. It was a testimony of promise. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Amira and Greg sat on the porch under a sky dusted with stars. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked softly. "Every single day," he said. "And I keep coming back to the same answer. What's that?" He took her hand. "Grace. Just grace." They sat in the quiet, listening to the crickets, the distant rush of the creek, the heartbeat rhythm of a town at peace. "I used to fear remembering," Amira said. "Now I think memory is how God reminds us he's never left." Greg smiled, pulling her close. "Then I'll remember this moment forever." She leaned against him, eyes closing, a smile spreading across her lips. "So will I." And so, dear listener, we close another chapter in the Worthington Chronicles. From forgotten memories to restored faith, from burden to blessing, Amira. And Greg's story reminds us that redemption isn't found in perfection, but in surrender. Sometimes God doesn't rewrite the story. He redeems the one you already have. If the unforgettable mind touched your heart, let it remind you that no memory is too painful, no past too broken, for grace to make new. I'm Amelia Worthington, and from all of us here at the Worthington Chronicles, thank you for sharing this journey with us. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love still heals and faith still restores. And until our next story, may your heart remember the light, and may grace always find you home.